I never thought the day I stopped chasing my wife would be the day that saved our marriage. But here we are, and let me tell you how 18 months of rejection followed by complete emotional withdrawal can transform a man into someone his own wife doesn't recognize anymore. It started like every great love story does, back when we first got married and everything felt electric, like we couldn't keep our hands off each other. And I remember thinking this woman was my entire world, my best friend, my lover, the person I wanted to wake up next to for the rest of my life. Those first 2 years were perfect, or at least they felt perfect to me. We'd stay up late talking about everything and nothing. We'd laugh until our stomachs hurt, and the physical connection we had was just this natural extension of how much we loved being together. I was working my way up at a tech company, putting in long hours, but always making time for us. And she had just landed her dream job at a marketing firm, and we felt like this power couple building our life together. Then somewhere around year 3, things started to shift in ways I didn't fully understand at first. Little changes that seemed innocent enough, like maybe she'd be too tired one night, which was fine because everyone gets tired, right? But then one night turned into 2 nights, and 2 nights turned into a week, and before I knew it, I was hearing the same excuse over and over again, like some kind of horrible mantra that would replay in my head every time I even thought about reaching for her. She was always too tired, always had a headache, always had an early morning meeting, and I told myself it was just stress from her new role, or maybe she wasn't feeling well, and I'd be understanding because that's what good husbands do. They don't pressure their wives, they don't make demands, they wait patiently and trust that things will normalize on their own. 1 month without intimacy turned into 2 months, then 3, and I started doing that thing where you count the days in your head, even though you hate yourself for counting. Even though you know keeping score makes you feel pathetic and desperate. I tried everything I could think of to fix whatever was broken between us. I planned romantic dinners with candles and her favorite wine. I'd clean the entire apartment from top to bottom, so she wouldn't stress about chores. I'd give her massages and ask about her day and listen carefully to her answers, trying to recreate that emotional connection we used to have. I suggested we take a weekend trip to this bed and breakfast upstate, thinking maybe a change of scenery would reignite something. And she agreed, but the whole time we were there she seemed distant, checking her work emails more than she looked at me. And when we got back to our room that first night, I tried to initiate something, and she just rolled over and mumbled about being exhausted from the drive. I started reading actual books about marriage and intimacy, books written by therapists and relationship experts, trying to understand if this was normal, if other couples went through dry spells this severe, and everything I read said communication was key, so I tried talking to her about it as gently as I could. I asked if maybe there was a medical reason, if she wanted to see a doctor about her energy levels or hormones or anything that might be affecting things, and she just looked at me like I was overreacting and brushed it off completely, told me I was making something out of nothing. I suggested couples therapy, thinking maybe a professional could help us navigate whatever this distance was, and she actually laughed, not in a cruel way, but in that dismissive way that made me feel small, like I was being dramatic about a problem that didn't exist. By the time our 4th anniversary rolled around, we hadn't been intimate in almost 5 months, and I decided I was going to make this night special. I was going to remind her why we fell in love in the first place, remind her of what we used to have. I made reservations at the restaurant where I proposed to her. I bought her favorite flowers. I wore the cologne she used to say drove her crazy. And during dinner, she seemed genuinely happy, smiling and laughing at my stories like she used to. And for the first time in months, I felt this spark of hope that maybe we were turning a corner. We got home around 10, and I opened a bottle of champagne we'd been saving. And we sat on the couch talking, and her hand was on my knee. And I thought, this is it. This is finally the breakthrough we needed. And I leaned in to kiss her, and she kissed me back, and for about 30 seconds, I thought we were finally going to reconnect after all these months. Then she pulled away, and I saw it in her eyes before she even opened her mouth. That same look I'd been seeing for what felt like forever, and she touched my face with this apologetic expression and told me she was just too exhausted from the long day and the wine was making her sleepy. Something inside me broke that night, not in an angry, explosive way, but in a quiet, permanent way, like a foundation cracking deep underground where nobody can see the damage, but you know the whole structure is compromised. I didn't argue with her. I didn't try to convince her or negotiate or express disappointment. I just smiled and said it was totally fine and kissed her forehead and told her to get some rest, acting like my heart wasn't shattering into pieces. I laid in bed next to her staring at the ceiling while she fell asleep within minutes, and I made a decision right there in the dark that would change everything between us. I decided I was done. Not done with the marriage, but done chasing her. Done initiating. Done making myself vulnerable only to be rejected over and over and over again. The next morning, I woke up different. I wasn't cold to her or mean or passive-aggressive. I was just calm, centered, like a switch had flipped in my brain, and suddenly all that desperate needy energy I'd been carrying around for months just evaporated into thin air. I made my coffee, kissed her goodbye before work like always, went about my day like everything was normal, except I had this strange sense of peace I hadn't felt in years, this lightness that came from finally letting go of something I'd been clinging to so desperately. Days turned into weeks, and I stuck to my silent resolution. I didn't try to hold her hand on the couch. I didn't suggest date nights. I didn't lean in for those lingering kisses. I was pleasant and friendly, but I'd stopped performing the role of pursuing husband completely. She noticed. Of course she noticed. About 3 weeks and she asked me if something was wrong, if I was upset with her about something, and I just gave her a calm smile and told her everything was perfectly fine and went back to reading my book like nothing had changed. I started going to the gym before work, not because I was trying to get revenge or make her jealous, but because I needed something for myself, something that made me feel strong when everything else made me feel powerless and small. I started saying yes to after-work drinks with colleagues I'd been turning down for years. I picked up photography as a hobby, spending Saturday mornings at this coffee shop downtown, taking pictures of strangers and street scenes instead of trying to plan activities with her. The weight started coming off, my shoulders got broader, my confidence grew, and it had nothing to do with her and everything to do with finally investing in myself instead of pouring all my energy into a marriage that felt completely one-sided. 2 months into my transformation, she cooked my favorite meal out of nowhere, pot roast with all the fixings, and she was being extra affectionate, touching my arm while we ate, laughing too hard at things that weren't that funny, and I could see exactly what she was doing, but I wasn't interested in playing that game anymore. That night, she actually initiated something for the first time in over a year. She kissed my neck while we were watching TV, her hand moving up my thigh, and old me would have jumped at the chance, would have been grateful for any scraps of affection she threw my way. But new me just kissed her forehead gently and mentioned I had an early client meeting and needed to get some sleep. The look on her face was pure confusion mixed with something else, something that looked almost like panic, and she sat there frozen while I got up and walked to the bedroom like nothing significant had happened. Over the next few weeks, she kept trying different approaches, wearing outfits she knew I used to love, suggesting we watch movies together, asking about my day with what seemed like genuine interest, and every single time I was polite and pleasant, but never took the bait, never gave her the reaction she was clearly looking for. I'd become this complete mystery to her, this version of her husband she didn't recognize, and I could see the anxiety starting to build behind her eyes every time I didn't react the way the old, desperate me would have reacted. 3 months after my 4th anniversary breakdown, she confronted me directly one evening, standing in the kitchen with her arms crossed, demanding to know what was going on with me, why I was acting so different, why I seemed so emotionally distant from her. I looked at her standing there, this woman I'd loved so desperately that I'd lost myself trying to make her happy, and I felt nothing but a strange calm when I answered her question. "I'm not acting different. I'm just tired," I said, echoing back the same excuse she'd given me hundreds of times, and I watched her face change as the words hit her, watched her realize exactly what I was doing, and for the first time in our entire marriage, I saw genuine fear in her eyes about losing me. The gym became my sanctuary over the next few months, my escape from a marriage that felt more like a polite roommate situation than any kind of real partnership, and I started going 6 days a week, pushing myself harder than I ever had in my entire life. I wasn't doing it for her. I wasn't doing it to make her jealous or to prove some point. I was doing it because for the first time in years I was putting myself first, and it felt absolutely incredible. The physical changes came faster than I expected. My body transformed in ways I didn't think possible at my age. My clothes fit differently. My posture improved dramatically, and I started catching women looking at me in the coffee shop, at work, in the grocery store, and it was this surreal feeling of being seen as attractive again after years of feeling completely invisible in my own home. My coworkers started commenting on how different I looked, how much more confident I seemed in meetings, and my boss noticed too because suddenly I was getting pulled into bigger projects, more important client presentations, and 6 months into my transformation, I got promoted to senior director, a position I'd been passed over for twice in the previous 2 years. I picked up cooking as a serious hobby, watching YouTube videos and experimenting with complex recipes. And I'd make these elaborate gourmet meals just for myself while my wife was working late. And I'd plate them beautifully and sit at the table alone and actually enjoy my own company for the first time in forever. I joined a hiking group that met every Sunday morning, started taking weekend photography trips to different parts of the state, and my social circle expanded in ways it hadn't since before we got married. And I realized I'd been so focused on fixing my marriage that I'd completely neglected building a life outside of it. My wife noticed all of it. I could see her watching me when she thought I wasn't looking, studying me like I was some stranger who'd moved into her apartment and replaced her husband. And she started asking questions about where I was going, who I was with, what I was doing, questions she'd never bothered to ask before when I was just the reliable husband waiting at home. She'd wait up for me when I came home from the gym, sitting on the couch pretending to watch TV, but actually just waiting to see me walk through the door, and I'd say hello, ask about her day politely, then head straight to the shower without lingering or trying to connect. The casual touches started coming from her side now. She'd brush against me in the kitchen, put her hand on my shoulder when she walked past, lean in close when we were sitting together. All these little calculated attempts to reconnect that felt desperate and transparent. She started dressing differently around the apartment, wearing clothes that showed more skin, doing her makeup even when we weren't going anywhere, and I recognized all of it for exactly what it was, a response to losing control of someone she'd taken completely for granted. One Saturday night she suggested we have a date night at home, and she actually cooked dinner, set up candles, put on music, the whole romantic setup, and I could see how much effort she'd put into it, how much she was trying. We ate and talked, and it was actually pleasant, and after dinner she suggested we move to the couch, and she sat close to me, closer than she had in months, and her hand was on my chest, and she was looking at me with these eyes that used to make me melt instantly. She leaned in to kiss me, and I let her. But I didn't lean into it the way I used to, didn't pull her closer or deepen the kiss or show any real passion. I just let it happen, and then pulled back naturally and asked if she wanted more wine like nothing special had occurred. The confusion and hurt on her face was almost painful to watch. She was trying so hard to seduce me, and I was treating it like any other ordinary evening. Pleasant, but not passionate. Friendly, but not remotely intimate. She asked me directly if I still found her attractive, and I told her of course I did. She was beautiful, and then I casually changed the subject to something I'd read in the news that day. The hot and cold game started after that. Some days she'd be distant and cold, almost punishing me for not responding to her advances, and other days she'd be overly affectionate, trying different approaches, different tactics, like she was running experiments to see what would finally break through my new exterior. I stayed completely consistent through all of it, calm and centered and unmoved by either extreme, and I could see it was driving her absolutely crazy in a way nothing else ever had in our relationship. My life had become genuinely full in ways it hadn't been in years. I had hobbies I was passionate about, friends I actually enjoyed spending time with, career momentum that excited me every morning, and a body I was proud of, and none of it depended on her validation or attention or approval. About 8 months into my transformation, I was working late on a presentation in the home office, and I needed to check something on our shared laptop because mine was charging in the bedroom and the battery had died. I opened it up and her email was still logged in from earlier, and I wasn't trying to snoop. I genuinely wasn't. But there was a draft email open on the screen addressed to her best friend from college, and the first line caught my eye before I could look away. I should have closed it immediately, should have respected her privacy and shut the laptop. But something made me start reading, and what I found absolutely destroyed me in ways her physical rejection never had, in ways I didn't think I could still be hurt. She was telling her friend about how empty and hollow she felt in our marriage, how she didn't feel anything romantic for me anymore, how she'd been actively avoiding intimacy, because the thought of it made her feel nothing, just numbness and obligation. She wrote about fantasizing about a different life, maybe being single again, maybe meeting someone new who excited her the way I used to in the beginning, someone who made her feel alive instead of trapped. She wrote about how she knew she should probably leave, but it was comfortable and safe, and she didn't want to deal with the drama and logistics of separation, and how I was a good provider and a good person, but she just didn't feel that spark anymore. She wrote about how guilty she felt sometimes when she saw how hard I was trying, especially in those early months, but that the guilt wasn't enough to make her actually want me, wasn't enough to change how she felt deep down. The words hit me like physical blows, each sentence confirming what I'd suspected but desperately hoped wasn't true, that this wasn't about being tired or stressed or going through a phase. This was about her consciously choosing to check out of our marriage while keeping me around as some kind of comfortable safety net. I sat there staring at that screen for probably 20 minutes, reading and rereading her words. And something shifted in me that night that was even more profound than my 4th anniversary breakdown. I quietly closed the laptop, walked to our bedroom, and started packing a bag, just throwing clothes and toiletries into a duffel, and the sound of the closet door opening must have woken her up because she sat up confused asking what I was doing at this hour. I told her I needed space, needed time away to think, and she immediately panicked, asking what happened, what she did, why I was suddenly leaving in the middle of the night. I didn't tell her about the email, didn't throw her words back in her face. I just said I needed to think about us, about our marriage, about what I actually wanted from my life moving forward. She started crying, actually crying, grabbed my arm, told me we could talk about whatever was wrong, that we didn't need space. We needed to work through this together like married people do. I gently removed her hand from my arm, looked her directly in the eyes, and told her I'd been trying to work through this for over a year, and she'd told me everything was fine. So now I needed to figure out if I still believed that anymore. I finished packing, grabbed my keys and wallet, and walked out of our apartment while she stood in the bedroom doorway crying and calling my name, begging me not to leave. I checked into a hotel about 20 minutes away, nothing fancy, just a clean room with a bed and blessed silence. And I sat on the edge of that bed staring at the wall feeling this strange, overwhelming mix of devastation and relief. The next morning I woke up without an alarm for the first time in months, ordered room service, and just sat with my thoughts without the weight of her presence, without the constant rejection, without pretending everything was okay when it clearly wasn't. My phone was blowing up with texts and missed calls from her, messages that started apologetic and quickly escalated to frantic, voice memos of her crying saying she didn't understand why I left, begging me to come home so we could talk this through. I listened to one of them while drinking my coffee, heard the genuine fear in her voice, the desperation, and I felt something I hadn't felt in our entire marriage. I felt like I had actual power, like my presence mattered, like losing me actually meant something real to her. 3 days into my hotel stay, after dozens of messages and calls that I'd ignored, I finally responded with a simple text telling her I needed more time and that I'd reach out when I was ready to talk. Her response came immediately, a long voice memo, and I almost didn't listen to it, but something made me press play. "Please come home. I'll change. I promise I'll change. Just please don't leave me," she said through tears. And for the first time in years, she sounded like she actually meant it, like she was finally seeing what she stood to lose. I texted back 3 words that I knew would hurt, but needed to be said, words that mirrored what she'd made me feel for so long. "I need time," I wrote. And then I turned off my phone completely, went to the hotel gym, and worked out until my muscles screamed and my mind finally went quiet. I stayed at that hotel for 2 full weeks, and in that time I did more thinking about my marriage than I had in the previous 4 years combined, examining what I wanted, what I deserved, and whether this relationship was something worth saving or something I was just too comfortable to let go of. My wife's messages continued daily, sometimes multiple times a day, and they evolved from frantic to reflective to desperate to angry and back to pleading, and I could see her going through actual stages of grief over potentially losing me. On day 15, I finally decided it was time to go home and have the conversation we should have had years ago, the honest conversation without me trying to be accommodating and without her deflecting everything. I texted her that I was coming back that evening and we needed to talk openly about everything. And her response was immediate. Just a simple okay with a heart emoji that felt both hopeful and absolutely terrified. When I walked through our apartment door that night, she was sitting on the couch waiting for me, and I could tell she'd been crying for hours. Her eyes were red and swollen, and she looked smaller somehow, more vulnerable than I'd ever seen her. We sat down across from each other, and the silence hung between us before she started speaking, and what came out was more honest than anything she'd said to me in years, maybe ever. She told me it was never about being tired. That was just the easy excuse, the convenient lie that didn't require her to examine why she was actually pulling away from me. She talked about how when we first got married, she felt herself disappearing into us, like her identity was getting swallowed by being a wife, and intimacy started to feel like giving up another piece of herself that she'd never get back, like she was losing control of her own body and choices. She said she associated physical closeness with vulnerability and vulnerability with losing control, and somewhere along the way she'd built these massive walls to protect herself without realizing she was locking me out completely and destroying our marriage. She admitted she'd been selfish, that she'd kept me around because I made her feel safe and secure and loved while refusing to give me what I needed in return, and she could see now how incredibly cruel that was, how much it had damaged me as a person. She told me about her mother's marriage, how her mom had given up everything for her dad and lost herself completely, and how terrified she was of becoming that, of disappearing into someone else's needs and wants. I listened to all of it without interrupting, just letting her talk. And when she finally finished, I told her my truth, told her how every single rejection had chipped away at my self-worth until I genuinely believed I was unlovable, undesirable, fundamentally not enough as a man. I told her about the nights I'd laid awake feeling completely alone despite sharing a bed with her, about how I'd tried everything I could think of to fix us, and she'd told me there was nothing wrong, nothing to fix, that I was imagining problems. I told her about finding the email draft to her friend, and I watched her face go completely pale as I recounted the words she'd written about feeling nothing for me, about fantasizing about a different life, about keeping me around because I was comfortable and safe. I asked her directly if any of that had actually changed or if she was just afraid of being alone, terrified of starting over, worried about what people would think if we got divorced. She broke down completely then, sobbing in a way I'd never seen her cry before, like something was breaking open inside her, and she swore those words were written in a dark moment when she was confused and running from her own issues, that seeing me transform and pull away had forced her to confront what she actually felt underneath all her fear. She said watching me become this confident, independent person who didn't need her anymore, who had his own life and friends and hobbies, had shaken her because it made her realize she did need me. She did want me. She'd just been too broken and frightened to access those feelings or admit them to herself. I told her I believed she was sorry and I believed she was frightened right now, but sorry and fear weren't enough to rebuild what we'd lost, that I needed to see sustained change, consistent effort, and complete brutal honesty moving forward. I laid out my conditions, absolute non-negotiables if we were going to even try to save this marriage, and I told her we needed to start couples therapy immediately, that she needed individual therapy to work through whatever childhood trauma was making her sabotage intimacy and connection, and that there could be no more lies, no more deflecting, no more avoiding uncomfortable conversations just because they made her feel exposed. I told her I needed her to be accountable for her choices, to explain when she was pulling away and why, and that rebuilding my trust would take months or maybe years of consistent action, not just words and promises made in a moment of crisis. She agreed to everything without hesitation, told me she'd already researched therapists and had an appointment scheduled for next week, that she'd do whatever it took to prove she was serious about fixing us, about becoming the partner I deserved. I told her I was moving into the guest bedroom for now, that physical intimacy was completely off the table until we'd done substantial work in therapy, and that I needed to see her show up emotionally before I could even think about showing up physically again. The look of hurt on her face was obvious and painful, but she nodded and said she understood, that she deserved that boundary after everything she'd put me through for the past year and a half. Over the next 6 months, we went to therapy every single week, sometimes twice a week when things got particularly difficult, and it was brutal and uncomfortable and necessary in ways I can't fully describe. She started unpacking her fear of vulnerability, her issues with control, actual trauma from her childhood that she'd never dealt with or even acknowledged, watching her parents' toxic dynamic and swearing she'd never let that happen to her. I watched her do the genuinely hard work of becoming self-aware, of recognizing her patterns, of sitting with uncomfortable emotions instead of running from them. I worked on my own issues too, my tendency to sacrifice myself to keep peace, my fear of confrontation and conflict, the ways I'd enabled her behavior by accepting crumbs and calling it enough, by not standing up for what I needed. We had breakthrough moments and major setback moments, nights where we connected emotionally like we used to and nights where old destructive patterns tried to resurface and drag us backwards. Her therapist diagnosed her with attachment issues stemming from her childhood, and we started to understand that her rejection of me wasn't actually about me at all. It was about her own fear of being consumed by love the way she'd watched her mother be consumed. Around month 7 of therapy, her mom got very sick, had to be hospitalized with heart problems, and I watched my wife start to retreat emotionally the way she always had when things got hard and overwhelming. But this time was different. This time she caught herself doing it, came to me crying one night, and told me she could feel herself wanting to run and push me away, but she didn't want to do that anymore, didn't want to fall back into those old destructive patterns. I held her while she cried and told her I wasn't going anywhere, that she could be vulnerable with me, and it wouldn't make her weak, wouldn't make her lose herself, that being vulnerable was actually the strongest thing she could do. A month after that, I moved back into our bedroom, and we started rebuilding physical intimacy slowly, carefully, with lots of communication about what felt safe and what felt frightening. A full year after I'd walked out of our apartment with that packed bag, we went back to the same restaurant where we'd had our 4th anniversary dinner, the night that had broken something fundamental in me and started this whole painful transformation. We sat across from each other, and I looked at this woman who was both the same person I'd married and someone completely different, someone who'd done the hard, painful work to show up for us, to become a genuine partner. I told her I didn't regret leaving, didn't regret those 2 weeks in the hotel, because without that she never would have woken up to what she was losing, would have kept sleepwalking through our marriage until there was nothing left. She reached across the table and took my hand and told me if I hadn't left, if I hadn't stopped chasing her and started chasing myself instead, she would have kept destroying us slowly until we both hated each other. We're not perfect now. We still have hard days and difficult conversations, moments where her old fears surface or where I feel that old hurt creeping back in. But we're both present in ways we never were before, both choosing each other consciously and actively instead of just going through the comfortable motions. This time our marriage isn't built on me chasing and her running, on me giving and her taking. It's built on 2 people who decided to actually fight for something worth keeping, who decided that love without work is just a comfortable lie we tell ourselves until it falls apart. What do you think about this story? Let me know in the comments, drop a like, and don't forget to subscribe for more real-life stories.